Israel has had control of Gaza and the West Bank since 1967. And you could kind of get away with occupying a group of people for, a few years after a war while you're figuring out what you're going to do, or on the transition to giving them their independence or something. I already hear in the YouTube comments, people will be like, well, they pulled out of Gaza in 2005. It's like, yeah, and then they put a full blockade around the country and they dominate every single inch of what happens in Gaza. It's 5 million Palestinians or something in that ballpark, between Gaza and the West Bank. None of them have any voting rights. None of them have any rights at all. And so how long can you have control of an area with a whole bunch of non-citizens who don't have voting rights before you sit there and go, but they're the only democracy in the region? It's like, not really. The idea that we're unconditionally behind Israel and do nothing, for the Palestinians, I don't think that helps us at all. And in fact, I think it's a huge part of the reason why we're so hated in the Muslim world. And it wasn't always like that.
So there was a positive sentiment towards America in the region, at least after World War I.
Yeah, it was certainly much better than it has been since then. And then, the creation of Israel pissed off a lot of people, obviously. Zionist settlers, before Israel was created, started moving to what was known as Palestine then. And they were trying to get more and more people to move there. At first, they had a lot of trouble getting, most Jews who were like in London or New York or wherever were like, I'm an accountant and things are okay. And I don't really feel like going to be a poor farmer in Palestine. Like, what is this project? After World War II, it really picked up steam and a lot of people wanted to move. Basically, they had been working on creating a Jewish homeland there for decades. And in 1947, when the British basically got out of there because the Jews had become terrorists and basically drove them out of Palestine, they kicked it over to the United Nations, which was brand new. And the United Nations was like, well, why don't we divide up the land? Like they made a recommendation. It wasn't like the General Assembly had no authority to just like carve up countries, but they were like, this is what we recommend. And they recommended that the Jews get 56% of the land and the Arabs get 44% of the land. And that was really not based on anything. I think Jews owned like 10% of the land at the time or something like that. The Arabs were like, no, this is ridiculous. Like, this has been our home for hundreds of years, thousands of years. Like, no, we're not giving them the majority. And then a civil war broke out, and about 750,000 Palestinians were kicked out and never allowed back in. And those are the people who are in Gaza and the West Bank to this day, or the children and grandchildren of them. And some of them are in Jordan and Lebanon and stuff. They fought a war. They fought a war again in the 50s. They fought a war again in the 60s. They fought a war again in the 70s. I mean, it was like there were major problems that came along. There is a Palestinian side to this story where like a lot of those people were genuinely wronged. America ultimately coming into this, which the U.S. was not at first, but ultimately deciding that we will be unconditionally on one side of this conflict, I think was not smart or fair. There was definitely some blackmail stuff going on. When the biggest, baddest country in the history of the world, the United States of America, goes, we got your back, you end up getting a lot ballsier than you otherwise would be. You're like, okay, well, I'm going to go start a fight because my big brother will come bail me out. And it's like, no, the UN recommends 56% for the state of Israel, okay? Then they go to war, and they don't just take that 56%, they take 78% of the land, okay? Then in 1967, they go to war with Egypt and Jordan, and then they take 100% of the land. So the last 22% is really what we're talking about, which is Gaza and the West Bank. Every single peace deal, when they actually sat down in the Oslo Accords, at Camp David, at any of this, it was always about that last 22%, which that's what they mean when they say 67 borders, is they're like, okay, you get the 78%. Oh, really? Not the 56% that you were supposed to have in the beginning that we didn't even think was fair back then. Not the 78% that you get that, but give us our last 22%. That's the deal.
I understand that perspective, like yesterday's price is not today's price, 100%, but I think like according to international law, you cannot take more land due to
you're not
conflict. I think that's what
there's a lot of international laws. The settlements are definitely illegal. You're not allowed to transfer your population into occupied territory, which they continue to do in the West Bank. And yes, I do think that Andrew's right that like you're not really allowed to seize land from a war. The whole reason why we have international law is that you can't just go win a war and then say your land is ours. It's not like Israel conquered Gaza and made it part of Israel, or conquered the West Bank and made it part of Israel. They're just conquering it and holding the people there forever. Like, and this is it's an unsustainable system. I do think the obvious thing is that look, you got 5 million Palestinians living in this land. They have to get to have something, and it shouldn't be Israel's decision even. Like, why do you decide whether they get to have their own government or they get to it's like they should have their
let's say that
you can't enslave people. I don't know, like that's just not an option. Like, Israel's got a pretty badass military. It is still hard to believe that they allowed October 7th to happen in the way they did. If you know anything about Israel and how much of a fortress it is and how prepared they are, it's the wait time just makes no sense. They could pretty easily just not let that happen again and like have solid border security. Israel won't let sugar or potatoes or all types of humanitarian aid into Gaza, but they would facilitate cash payments to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars directly to Hamas, because actually was the big secret, that Benjamin Netanyahu was intentionally keeping Hamas in power in Gaza. But I don't think the standard can be, we're going to dominate you and keep you in grinding poverty, and then with impunity whenever we want to go on these like bombing campaigns. I'm talking pre-October 7th. Like, this has just been the status quo in Gaza. I grant you that it's hard to say when you go with each one of these things, you go, well, which was a response to which, right? But if I'm just being honest here, you go, this was a response to that, which was a response to that, which was a response to that, which was a response to a bunch of Eastern Europeans moving to a land they didn't inhabit and kicking hundreds of thousands of the people there out. Like, that's really what the first thing that this is a response to. And it's just kind of hard to get away from that. Look, the Native Americans, like, that problem here, right, is like solved pretty much. Were there instances where Native Americans attacked, you know what I mean, like settlers, and then they were responding? Right. Sure. But what was the first thing? The first thing was us coming over here.
For sure. You could make the argument that there were always Jews there. Even though these Eastern European Jews came, there were Jews. There was
always a small population. Yeah, but look, the Jews there also did, pre-Zionism, live in relative harmony with the Arabs. The early Zionists even said it was part of the reason why they wanted to make their homeland in Palestine.
Because it was so welcoming.
Relatively speaking, the Ottomans and the Arabs had been better friends to the Jews than the Europeans had been. That was really where they dealt with the brunt of their...
So maybe the argument shouldn't be that they had this like amazing relationship. Maybe the argument is it's better than white people were treating us.
Basically, the problems got worse and worse as kind of like the Zionist experiment got more and more aggressive. And there were a lot of mistakes made along the way. There's one figure in Zionism who I find is my favorite, Chaim Weizmann. So he was almost supposed to be David Ben-Gurion, who ultimately became the first prime minister of... He was like ahead of him in position. Chaim Weizmann's whole theory was that, like, look, if this is going to work, there's only one way it's going to work, which is that we have to, like, just smother these Arabs with kindness. And we got to bring all this investment in and make their lives so much better than their lives were before we got here. And that's the only way that we're actually going to have like a meaningful, sustainable homeland where we're not at war with our neighbors. This was swallowed by the Zionists for a while. And it was really after World War II when like Ben-Gurion and all these other guys, it was almost like, that was all nice and good before, but like these guys just tried to exterminate us. So now we're going to take what's ours and we're going to do it by any means necessary. If we got to embrace terrorism to kick the British out. And you could see, you know, you're talking like 1946, 1947, but at the same time, you could also go from the perspective of Palestinian Arabs. You're like, hey, we didn't do that. Yeah. Like, that wasn't us. Like, we're like, why are we paying the price for what, like, some Europeans did to you? Like, hey, carve up a part of Germany and give it to them if that's what happened.
Netanyahu. So what is he inspired by? What is he motivated by?
He's a member of the Likud party. The Likud party was founded by Menachem Begin, who was one of the terrorists before the creation of Israel, and a brutal one at that. They said in their own words that they were embracing terrorism. In the 70s, they had a meeting at Camp David, and Israel vaguely... You know, if you could think 1967, they took over Gaza and the West Bank. By the 70s, the U.S. was kind of like, listen, we're going to give you in perpetuity billions of dollars every year. And then it was kind of thrown in there like, and by the way, you got to eventually give the Palestinians a state. Like, you can't just rule them forever. And they kind of agreed to that. So in the 90s, this was supposed to be, they're finally doing it. And Yitzhak Rabin and Arafat and Bill Clinton took pictures together. So when Arafat went back, after initially, it may have been initially signing, or it may have been one of the subsequent meetings, but Palestinians were throwing their keys. And they had their old keys from their homes in you know, wherever these Palestinian villages that are now part of Israel. Like you sold us out, because they're hanging on to some dream that they're going to take back over the whole thing, which is like just never going to happen. And so there's political pressure on him there. Yeah. And then, you know, there was also some political pressure on Yitzhak Rabin. Like, there was that right-wing Israeli who murdered him.
Yeah, that seems like pressure.
So there was also some of that pressure on him.
Wow.
Traditionally, what the view was that, look, you have to make peace with the Palestinians. Otherwise, you're never going to make peace with the broader Arab world. That was the traditional thinking, okay? And because the beef with the rest of the Arab world was over the Palestinians, right? And all of them essentially refused to recognize Israel. Either they didn't recognize them at all, or they didn't recognize them having control of Gaza and the West Bank. And essentially, what the Netanyahu doctrine was he was like, no, I can flip this thing. And the Abraham Accords were really like a culmination of the Netanyahu doctrine. He goes, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go work out deals with the surrounding Arab countries so that I never have to work out a deal with the Palestinians. And then Jared Kushner Donald Trump's son-in-law had the brilliant idea that, hey, we got a whole lot of money. We could just bribe the shit out of all these countries and give them new fighter jets for you and a little money package for you. Because the only hope for the Palestinians ever has been like, maybe the rest of the Arab countries are coming at some point.
Again.
And then when you see them make all these deals, it's like, nope, you will be subjugated forever. You now live in hopelessness.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that.
I figured that like Jared Kushner's efforts out there were universally accepted as like his finest achievement. But it does create a sentiment, you can imagine, within the Palestinian people that there is no hope. But I do have a concern. Let's say you go back to the borders, you say, hey, we are going to stop, you can use occupying, whatever word you want to use. We're going to completely remove ourselves. You guys are on your own. Imagine there's going to be some support from the Muslim world as well, maybe the United States of America, blah, 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 doesn't matter. But the message goes out there and it's essentially, but if there is one attack, we are going to respond in kind. Are there not nefarious actors in the Israeli government potentially that could stage, what is that called?
False flag.
A false flag? Like this is, I mean, Americans, we've done this. Even if you have everybody operating in good faith, how can you even trust an attack that would come over? It's
a very good point.
It just feels helpless, all of it.